Once again, my name is Scott Kuykendall. My background is ecology. So I was an ecologist focused on wetland ecology, working for engineering firms for over 20 years. So I am not now, nor have I ever been, a snow and ice operator. But once I accepted the job as water resource specialist for McHenry County, I by default became an expert on sensible salting practices. McHenry County has long been a leader in sensible salting, and really has been an important part of McHenry County for many, many years. One of the things we do every year is hold workshops on sensible salting, training operators on how to reduce salt pollution. And this is one of the presentations covering that. So we're going to be talking about salt smart solutions to road salt pollution today. And okay. So we're going to be talking about the connection between the use of road salt and our water resources, why road salt is a problem, and what solutions are available. So snow and ice management is absolutely critical. So during wintertime, if we weren't actively managing the roads would be very dangerous. So our management of roads, snow and ice in wintertime saves lives and helps ensure public safety. It protects property and maintains commerce and economic development throughout the winter. However, the materials that we use are toxic chemicals. They're not benign materials. They are toxic chemicals, and they are excessively applied. Our practices developed when salt was very cheap, and our awareness of the consequences of our use of road salt were not very good. We can't continue with the practices that were developed during that time period. They damage our infrastructure and our environment, and they do pollute our water resources. Illinois has a lot of roadways. So Illinois has over 300,000 linear miles of roadway. Most of those linear miles have 2 to 4 lanes. So that's a lot of surface area being treated with salt aggressively throughout the wintertime. But it's not just roads that we salt. Basically, every paved surface that we put down is being treated with salt throughout the wintertime. So that's just an enormous amount of area being treated with toxic chemicals. And there is no such thing as an environmentally friendly deicer. The packaging on with salt products can have pretty outrageous claims, and there really is no oversight for them. So they can call the most toxic chemical environmentally friendly without any type of repercussions. The only environmentally friendly deicer that can be put down is the only environmentally friendly deicer out there is a deicer that's not put down. So the vast majority of deicers are chloride based, and chloride is one of the main culprits that causes our problems. And we also need to be putting the right product down for the pavement temperature. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but road salt does not work below 15 degrees. So if you're putting road salt down during a polar vortex, all you're doing is polluting the environment. So the main chemicals that we use are sodium chloride, and that's our rock salt. That's the cheapest, and so it's the most common one that we put down, but it's only effective down to 15 degrees. Calcium chloride is the next most common one that we use. It's far more expensive, but it is effective down to negative 25 degrees. And then there's also magnesium chloride that's effective down to 0 degrees. And then there are chloride-free products. Calcium magnesium acetate is one that is often sold as a pet safe product, but it's very expensive. So it's not something that can be replace the chloride-based products that are used for winter anti-icing and de-icing, and they're only effective down to 20 degrees. So anything colder than that, they're ineffective. And then there's a product called potassium formate. Its common name or trade name is Entry, and it's a liquid that you spray down, but it's extremely expensive. So once again, it's not going to have broad application on roadways and parking lots, but several of our contractors that we work with do use it as entryways. or near sensitive vegetation, or on parking decks that can't use chloride-based products because it will destroy the parking decks. And then it's also effective down to -63 degrees. So it really does have applications, but you're not going to see it widely used to replace road salt. So chloride is the big culprit that we're concerned with. Chloride is extremely soluble in water. As soon as it comes in contact with that water, it is in solution. And once it's in solution, there's really no effective way to remove it. A single teaspoon of salt will permanently contaminate a 5-gallon bucket of water. So just to provide some scale to the toxicity of chloride. The EPA's secondary drinking water standard is 250 milligrams per liter, because that is when salt or water starts to taste salty when the chloride levels get that high. To put it in context, our natural background levels for chloride, since we don't have salt marshes, or we're not in Utah with the Great Salt Lake, our natural background levels are usually below 1 milligram per liter. They can range between 1 and 10 milligrams per liter, particularly downstate. You'll find areas that have higher levels, but our natural level typically does not go above 10 milligrams per liter, and it's almost always in our area well below 1 milligram per liter. But with our use of road salt, we're increasing the concentrations up. You'll have spring flushes where the concentrations spike at like 2,000 milligrams per liter. So we're altering our ecology significantly. So as we scale up, a single container of Morton salt on our countertop will contaminate 4 years worth of drinking water for a person, or make 30 gallons of water unlivable for fish forever. More realistic scale is a single salt truck, and that'll contaminate over 65,000 years worth of drinking water for a person, or make 500,000 gallons of water unlivable for fish forever. And we put an awful lot of salt trucks down. And when we talk about contamination, this is an animated slide that engineer named Jim Patchett provided me like well over 10 years ago. I've searched for over 10 years trying to find a replacement, and I can't find anything better than this older model that he provided us. But when it rains or snow melts, water infiltrates down through the ground, recharges our groundwater table, but water is not just standing still. It's constantly in motion. So it's moving downward, but it's also moving laterally and providing a base flow of cool, clean water to our lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands. However, as we introduce more and more contaminants to the environment, those contaminants can leach down, and that's particularly true with chloride. Nothing removes chloride. So with most of our pollutants, it'll bond with soil particles, or it'll be restricted in other ways from moving downward into our water. With chloride, it's not taken up by vegetation. It doesn't bond with soil particles. So as it moves into our groundwater, the concentrations become ever greater, and that can impact our drinking water. But then that's also providing a base flow of pollutants throughout the year. So instead of just having those seasonal spikes when we get our snow melt, as the concentrations in our groundwater increases, that's providing a base flow of chloride to our aquatic resources throughout the year. And so chloride is dangerous for our drinking water, fish and aquatic life, plants, soil, pets, and infrastructure. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But what I'll often hear from public works directors and others is, we've always done it this way. And that's one of the most dangerous sayings in the world. All that is doing is justifying bad behavior. So we have not always used salt the way we do today. I started high school in 1980. And during the 80s, my main mode of transportation during the wintertime was this mode of transportation called skitching. I don't know if anybody is old enough to remember that, or was aspiring juvenile delinquent in high school. But I actually had boots specifically for skitching. And what you do is you run up behind a car at a stop sign, grab onto the chrome bumper, and then you just slide on the snowpack, and I could literally go from one end of town to the other, just sliding on the snowpack behind the cars. There were only 2 roads in our town, and this was a pretty affluent town on the north side of Chicago. And I could go from one side of town to the other, skitching, and we only had 2 main roads that were ice-free throughout the winter. So somehow we survived. But we've got such unrealistic expectations today that we really need to undo. People should not think that they can drive like it's a sunny 70-degree day in the middle of a snowstorm, but that is what people perceive today. And so we've got a long way to go to undo those misperceptions. This is an animated slide that was put together by the Illinois State Water Survey based on a study they did in Kane County. So what they're looking at are the increased levels of contamination from chloride in our sand and gravel aquifers. So the left panel is showing contamination in our sand and gravel aquifers. The right panel is showing the contamination in the limestone or dolomite bedrock layer below the sand and gravel. So that's our shallow bedrock layer. And it uses color-coded layers to show the increased levels of chloride. So 250 milligrams per liter is the drinking water standard, and that's 200. That's shown in orange. And so I'll turn the slide on, and it'll show the increase of chloride contamination in our aquifers from 1965 to 2015. So we start using road salt in the 60s, and almost immediately start seeing an increase of chloride contamination. As we move on into the 70s, you're seeing increased concentrations where the population density is the greatest. So what this is showing is there is a direct correlation between our use of road salt and groundwater contamination. So by the 90s, we're starting to see hotspots meeting or exceeding the drinking water standard throughout the sand and gravel layers. By the 2000s, those hotspots are almost common throughout the populated areas, and are also getting greater and greater concentrations in the shallow bedrock aquifers. And so then by the middle of the 2000 teens, those hotspots exceeding our drinking water standards are common throughout our populated areas. And this pattern is replicated throughout the country. This is not isolated to our area by any means. Out east, where they've been using salt longer, they've actually got problems where people's hot water heaters will only last a couple years because the corrosion that occurs from the chloride levels in their groundwater. And the DOTs in New Hampshire, if people can prove that their water is contaminated, they have to pay to replace those people's wells. So this is causing very expensive problems nationally. And so low concentrations of chloride can kill the fish, the food fish and wildlife depend on. So it can impact the base of our food chain. So it'll kill off the phytoplankton and the zooplankton and the macroinvertebrates that drive the food chain. So as those food sources at the base of the food chain dies off from chloride levels, that has rippling effects up the food chain. Higher concentrations can kill fish and wildlife directly, and I'm not sure what that last one is. I'll have to update that. But the Conservation Foundation and their Salt Creek study group has been studying this extensively for a long time and has very strong data showing the impacts of chloride on the aquatic habitats in Salt Creek. Lakes turn over naturally. So in the spring and the fall, water from the bottom of the lakes rises to the surface, bringing with it nutrients that drive the food chain. And then it takes oxygen from the upper layers of the lake down to the bottom. So life can exist through the entire profile of the lake. Salt water is heavier than fresh water. And so as the concentrations of from road salt increase in our water bodies, it settles down at the bottom of our lakes, and that prevents that turnover from occurring. This is actually one of the things that really has driven Minnesota to take this so seriously. They are one of the biggest leaders in the country, and that's because the land of 1,000 lakes is now becoming the land of 1,000 dying lakes, and fishing is such a part of their culture and part of their economy, and the use of road salt is impacting that. EPA has determined that the maximum amount of acute contamination that can be present before it impacts aquatic life, and then chronic levels. So acute is like our spring runoff, where you get this flush of chlorides with the snow melt, but those can wash downstream and then go down to lower levels. Chronic levels are where those, like in our groundwater, where the concentrations increase over time and become permanent problems. And so the chronic level is the single teaspoon of salt in a 5-gallon bucket of water. That brings you to 250 milligrams per liter. And then an acute level will be 860 milligrams per liter. But like I said, during that spring flush, you can have acute levels exceeding 2,000 milligrams per liter. So these our use of road salt is having profound impacts on our aquatic life. Most people have probably seen this, but vegetation is injured by road salt, and what you'll often see is browning, burning of the vegetation from road salt. But it can have profound impacts on vegetative growth. One of the things we're most concerned with is, since our native vegetation is not adapted to salt, what happens is, as the concentrations of salt increase, it kills off our native vegetation and creates openings for invasive species to move in. One of the things we're most concerned about is Phragmites. So Phragmites has moved in largely from our use of road salt, and so they'll get into the right-of-ways and spread throughout the country, and then expand outward from the drainage swales. So if you're not familiar with Phragmites, it's as you drive home tonight and you see vegetation rising 15 feet into the air, more than likely that's the Phragmites, and it creates a dense stand of nothing but Phragmites. It doesn't provide any benefits. Cattail, at least, will provide water quality benefits in some habitat, but Phragmites, it just creates this dense cluster of nothing but Phragmites that provides no value, and causes all kinds of problems. As the salt concentrations increase in the soil, they are no longer able to support life, and so particularly in like the landscapers will do the salt management in the wintertime and actually destroy the very thing that they are responsible for maintaining the rest of the year. So as the salt concentrations increase, they just become unable to support life. De-icing salt can sicken pets and wildlife that eat it, lick it off their paws, or drink the salty snow and melt runoff. And then some birds can die from ingesting de-icing salt. And then road salt damages concrete and asphalt. So it's one of the main things impacting the roads that we're trying to make safe. So it creates pitting in the concrete, significantly shortening the lifespan of the roads and bridges. And then that creates an opening for the salt to get in and corrode the metal reinforcement in concrete, further exacerbating or accelerating the degradation of our roadways. It degrades, corrodes metal pipes and structures, and then obviously corrodes the metal in our cars. So the economic impacts from our use of road salt are staggering. Unfortunately, there is no alternative to salt for our snow and ice management. So our best option is to use salt wisely. So one of the hats I wear is I'm part of an organization called the Northwest Water Planning Alliance, and we're dedicated to protecting drinking water throughout northeastern Illinois. And I chair their sensible salting committee. And our definition of sensible salting is the use of best management practices for snow and ice management that maintain safety for pedestrians, drivers, vehicles, and property, while eliminating the unnecessary applications of salt in order to minimize impacts to water and the environment. So I highlight two things here: maintain safety. So in no way, shape, or form are we talking about reducing safety. We're 100% talking about maintaining safety, or in many cases, actually improving safety. But what we want to do is eliminate the unnecessary applications of salt. Like I said earlier, many of our practices developed when salt was cheap and we didn't understand the impacts. And so I'd say much of what we put down, particularly in the case of parking lots and sidewalks, up to 80% or more of what we're putting down provides absolutely zero benefit to humanity, but it's coming at great economic and environmental cost. So we want to eliminate the unnecessary applications. And we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. So it's not a one size fits all. Lots of things that can be done. Many of them are very, intuitive and should be done anyway, like covering our salt. There's no excuse for having open piles of salt anymore. Every time it rains or snow melts, water is just infiltrating through and gushing out chlorides into our environment. It's also destroying the salt that they paid good money for. There are so many options available now for covering our salt. There's no excuse for uncovered piles. The main thing that we want to do with snow in the wintertime is physically remove the snow and ice. You don't want to just burn it off with chemicals. You want to physically remove it and only use the chemicals wisely and strategically to prevent ice from forming or to break up ice and melt ice that has formed. That is the only thing that chemicals should be used for. Calibrating equipment. Equipment does not come from the manufacturer calibrated, nor does it stay calibrated. So you need to calibrate equipment at least annually, and that will then allow you to use the correct application rate. And you want your salt to be dispersed widely. Each kernel of salt will basically melt up to a 12-inch radius. So you don't need a carpet of salt to do the job. You want a broadly dispersed pattern, and you need to have calibrated equipment in order to do that. Pre-wetting salt. So salt actually needs to be wet and create a brine in order for it to work. So when you're putting it down in a dry form, it actually has to absorb moisture from the air or be crushed into the snow and have friction trigger the melting process to create brine and then have it work. So if you're pre-wetting the salt before you put it down, you're putting it down in an active state and therefore don't need to put reapplications down over and over again. You're putting it down in an active state and it's working more effectively. You're also reducing bounce. So when you put dry product down on pavement, a significant portion of that is actually just bouncing off into the right of way, where once again, it's providing zero value to humanity, but coming at great economic and environmental cost. So when you pre-wet it, it reduces that bounce, it puts it where it needs to be done and reduces your need for reapplications. And like we talked about before, you want to use the correct product for the pavement temperature. Air temperature can be a lot different than pavement temperature. So you need to be measuring pavement temperature to decide what you're putting down. And one of the main things that we're using is liquid for anti-icing. So you're putting down a liquid brine before a storm, and that prevents ice from forming during the storm and makes it easier to push the snow off, to physically remove the snow and get back down to bare pavement without reapplication of solid product over and over again. So it's actually making the roads safer while reducing the amount of chlorides that are being put down. And this is where, when you hear about beet juice doesn't replace the brine, but it is an additive that's put into the brine to improve its performance. So it lowers the melting temperature that it'll work at. And then you can actually put it down up to 72 hours before a storm because the beet juice helps it bond to the pavement and prevent it from just being washed off. So it's one of the main things that we're using. And McHenry County, we've been using liquids for quite a while for anti-icing, and it is improving the performance and making the road safer. But we're also using it for de-icing. So we now have 4 routes that are liquid only. So we're not putting down any rock salt unless it's very specific conditions. And each of those routes, we're reducing the amount of salt that is being used, which is also translating into cost savings. We started out with 1 route and tested the metrics and just monitored it. And year after year, we've been able to expand the program and improve our performance and reduce cost. We've been holding sensible salting training workshops since 2009 and have trained over 1,000 people in sensible salting practices. And most of our counties are doing similar programs. We actually have our own program. Most counties have been hiring a contractor consultant to come in and give their programs, and they do a great job, but we're actually very proud of the program that we put on ourselves. And it's typically included a session with classroom training, followed by hands-on training. This year, we expanded that and actually made it, as I talked about before, set it up so that municipalities or townships can bring their vehicles to 3 of our locations. So the Algonquin Township, and the McHenry County Division of Transportation, and we will train them how to calibrate their equipment. And then as Hanna will talk about, we are focusing heavily on parking lots and sidewalks, because the sheer volume of area that's being treated with salt in the wintertime on our parking lots and sidewalks is just catastrophic. We need to fundamentally change the way we do winter snow and ice practices on parking lots and sidewalks. And Hanna's program is an exciting tool to accomplish that. So she'll talk more about that. So just closing thoughts, Illinois is very fortunate to have clean, reliable water resources. Clean water is necessary for all life. Clean water is also necessary for all economic development. Our water is our main economic driver, and our use of road salts and deicers are polluting our water. So we all need to practice sensible salting in order to protect our future. So we want to leave safe, sustainable water supplies for future generations. You've got my contact information, but if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can share information that you can then take back to your public works or elected officials. So I think that took a little bit longer than I anticipated, Hanna. Are there any quick questions that people have? Okay, hearing none, we will go ahead and have Hanna give her presentation on the Salt Smart Certified program.
Great. So I'm Hanna Miller. I am with the Conservation Foundation, and I work with Jennifer Hammer to co-coordinate the Salt Smart Collaborative program, as well as do a lot of other chloride-specific work with the Conservation Foundation. So if you are not familiar with the Conservation Foundation, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We've been around for over 50 years at this point. We just celebrated our 50th year, which is very exciting. And we are also an accredited land trust. So we've gone through the process to make that happen. We are doing some great work across our sort of our core service area. And some of that work includes land preservation, restoration. We do a lot of environmental education with children, but also adults, which I'm excited that we're starting to branch out to just help get our programs out there. We do a lot of education, outreach, and advocacy, and we're doing a lot of great watershed work as well. If you're familiar with the Conservation at Home program, that's one of our programs, as well as we run a 60-acre organic vegetable farm. So we primarily work in DuPage, Kuykendall, and Will counties, but some of our work does take us into Cook, DeKalb, LaSalle, and Grundy. We are headquartered at McDonald Farm in South Naperville. We're actually in Will County, which is pretty exciting. Our farm is a pretty great place if you've never actually been out there. From a land perspective, we've saved over 35,000 acres through various programs that we have between our conservation easements, as well as various programs with buy and holds, helping other organizations preserve and save land. We've done this across 8 different counties, which is pretty exciting. From a watershed side, which is my primary work area, is that we provide staffing to 4 different watershed groups: the DuPage River Salt Creek Work Group, the Chicago Area Waterways Chloride Work Group, the Lower DuPage River Watershed Coalition, and the Lower Des Plaines Watershed Group. We've also been coordinating the DuPage River Sweep for over 30 years and doing MS4 education in our kind of core service area for at least 20 years. Where I come into play is with the Chicago Area Waterways Chloride Work Group, the Lower Des Plaines Group. I do a lot with chlorides with both of those groups, but we run and coordinate the Salt Smart Collaborative, which is a program of the Conservation Foundation. And the collaborative is really a regional clearinghouse of information and resources that we gear towards both the general public and residents, but also our public agencies and our private snow management companies. We're trying to come at this from getting this information out there to as many different types of organizations and different types of people as we can, just to help educate on the problem with salt, but also what we can do about it. So we are working on developing various training and outreach materials to help fill these gaps, and also to help our various partners meet the regulatory requirements that some of our partners need to have training for their staff done every year, and we're helping to offer programs to help them meet that. So just like Scott, one of those big things I like to talk about when we talk about salt is reminding everyone that safety does come first. And while we're helping people find their why for making reductions of salt, we waste a lot of salt every year. We waste a lot of salt that is in the curb line. We waste a lot of salt that's not where people walk or drive. And we waste a lot of salt that just gets tracked into buildings and damages our infrastructure, damages our environment. So there's a lot that we can do to focus on protecting the environment, but also making good salt reductions, but still providing safe surfaces that the traveling public needs. And a lot of what Scott was just mentioning and referencing here was these best management practices. So that's things that are going to waste less salt, but maintain those expected levels of safety. These practices, I love talking about them because these are proactive practices. These are ones that you're not necessarily being reactive about. You're taking a step to protect safety ahead of a storm, which is a great way to be just a bit more of a kind of take that extra step. But these practices also save time and money. I love talking about the why with our contractors because they all come up with a different one. We have contractors that are much more invested in protecting their landscaping to the contractors that are just wanting to save time and money. So there's a lot of ways that we can help people find their why for salt. And I'm going to kind of talk through give a briefer version of Scott's presentation here just shortly, but thinking about why I care about chlorides and why this matters to me, but also to think about how to help you find your why for making this change. So road salt, like Scott said, we use a lot. Just straight up, we use a lot during the winter time. And in our urban areas in Illinois, that's our most common source of road salt. But in areas where we have, especially where we have groundwater for drinking water, our water softeners do definitely contribute to our chloride issue, especially from the salt used in the water softeners. In our agricultural areas, our rural areas, you'll see it as dust suppressants. You'll also see it being contributed as fertilizers. So it's not just road salt, but that's probably our biggest one in the urban areas. And that's the one that we primarily focus on, given our service areas more urban. But definitely to think about ways that you can make reductions in other areas that are not just road salt. So like Scott said, salt is polluting our waterways, just simple as that. It's one teaspoon to contaminate 5 gallons of water. And that when you put that into perspective, 1 ton of road salt is enough to contaminate an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So just to kind of think about how much that really is and what that looks like, it's astounding to think about. It's just that amount of salt can really do a lot of damage. And when we're thinking about kind of what that looks like is we get during the winter, we have our background levels, but our background levels are still higher than I would like to see them. So we're really trying to focus on these best management practices, help bring this curve down. This graph represents an average kind of chloride levels over years of data. If I were to show you all the individual years, this graph looks pretty messy. So we simplified it a little bit, but we spike during the winter time when road salt's used, but then it takes a really long time for our chloride levels to come back down in springtime. This is due to all the salt that gets kicked into the curb line that gets washed out in the spring rains. This is all the salt that ends up in our storm drain system that slowly but surely makes its way out into the waterways. So there's a lot of reasons of where if we waste less, we use less, we can really help to reduce this curve and really help to bring our background levels down, especially during the spring when our aquatic life is most impacted, where you see that little fish, sad little fish, when our aquatic life is most impacted by chloride, especially when they're in their juvenile and they're in their young stages. So we definitely see that chloride impacts from a reproduction level for our fish, for the toxic to eggs in those juvenile stages. It's very toxic to amphibians, as that can really dry them out and cause a lot of issues. Just like Scott said, it burns and kills vegetation. It definitely makes changes to our soil composition. And we get a lot more of these salt-tolerant invasive species that are crowding out our native plants that are doing good things for our native wildlife. And as well as what Scott talked about with the rising chloride levels in our drinking water. So we get a lot of impacts to the natural environment, but just as much as there are impacts to our natural environment, we definitely see it from the built environment. It's corrosive to bridges, it's corrosive to roads, sidewalks. You'll see it with building infrastructure. You'll see it with garbage cans on the side of the road in parks, where it's just been a lot has been spread in our parking lots and sidewalks as well. So it's very much is an impact to a wide array of our environment and our built and natural environments. And so there is a true cost of salt, and Minnesota has done a couple studies on this, and it's astounding of what kind of costs are associated with this. I think about from just fixing the basics all the way to doing the full-blown water treatment plant upgrades. So it can get very expensive, and it impacts a lot of different facets of our infrastructure and our built and natural environments. But the good thing is that we can make changes, and we can do something about this to help reduce our impact. So when we talk about our salt smart practices, we talk about them thinking about them like a spokes on a wheel. The more spokes you have in your program, the more practices you're using, the stronger your program is going to be, the stronger your wheel is going to be. So all of these different practices that Scott has talked about and has referenced here are great practices to add to your program if you're not doing this already, to really help to make an intentional reduction in your salt use, and to be intentional on what salt you do use so that you are not wasting salt. A lot of what these practices are and that we talk about are anti-icing, they're pre-wetting, they're calibrating your equipment. Know really how much is coming out the back of your equipment so that you can be accurate and intentional with your salt use. Another thing we really like to highlight for our communities is to communicate. When our residents know that there's a plan and that they're not just throwing a guy in a truck with some salt, and they're actually actively planning for this and doing things to improve their safety, a lot of our communities have seen a lot of benefit out of that from just doing the simple communication. And that is thinking about things like when there's snow, reminding drivers to go slow, and reminding folks that the roads their plow trucks are out there, they're doing their jobs. A lot of our communities are implementing things like segmented blades, where the individual blades can conform better to the pavement surface, getting a much cleaner scrape, which can then reduce a lot of how much salt is coming out the back of their truck that they're needing to kind of get that last bit of work done. A lot of our communities maintain snow and ice plans. They have plans for how much salt they're going to be using so they can be intentional with the salt use based on weather conditions, pavement temperature. They have routes that they're managing. They have a plan, and they're keeping this plan up to date. So there's a lot of things that our communities are doing that are specific to reducing salt, but still maintaining the safe surfaces that their traveling public depends on. And I always bring up beet juice because I always get a question, and we always end up talking about beet juice. And it's one of those where beet juice is not an alternative to road salt. Beet juice is an additive that we add to deicers like road salt to help improve their performance. So if you've ever put a can of regular Coke in the freezer and a can of Diet Coke in the freezer, the can of Coke is going to take, with the full sugar, is going to take a lot longer to freeze than the Diet can of soda where it doesn't have sugar, and that's going to freeze much faster. So by adding in these sugars, adding in these carbohydrates, that road salt is sticking to the surface better, but it's also helping to depress that freezing point further, making that road salt more effective so you can use a lot less. One of the things that we offer through the Salt Smart Collaborative that I kind of mentioned before, but is the importance of annual training. So we've offered this last year. We offered virtual de-icing workshops, as well as did a workshop with Scott in McHenry County for parking lots and sidewalks as well. So I'm really excited that we have these workshops. We're continuing to offer them throughout the year. Jennifer and I are working on dates coming up, so keep an eye out on the Salt Smart website for more information about that. But these training workshops are offered in partnership with various county partners, our watershed groups, and a lot of other stakeholders for both roads and parking lots and sidewalks. We also have done various what we've coined mentoring sessions of bringing different communities together to kind of talk through different important topics. So things like calibration, just like Scott brought his folks in McHenry County, we've been doing folks to talk about liquids and learn more about liquids from other communities that are doing these different practices, because I've found that one of our great benefits is we have a lot of staff that are doing these good things. We just need to share that knowledge amongst each other, and they can learn a lot from each other and kind of really learn to use these practices and learn from others' experiences. And so just the same as kind of with our information for especially the general public and how you can be salt smart at home, we are definitely sharing a lot of great resources out there. So things that when we talk about this with our general public, is we're reminding people that an ounce of prevention can go a long way in reducing how much salt you need. That's thinking about rerouting gutters. That's making sure that you're fixing uneven surfaces so that you're not inadvertently causing a icy situation that then you're dealing with salt. So trying to think about how you can kind of make those changes at home to reroute drainage so that you're not needing to use extra salt where you otherwise would not necessarily need to use it. It's also using the right tools for the job. So it's thinking about if you have light fluffy snow, use a broom instead. If you have heavy snow, turning to a snowblower or a shovel. If you have ice, turning to an ice scraper. It's all about clearing as much snow as you can before turning to the deicers and turning to salt. Because if you can get safe surfaces that you're comfortable with just a shovel, with just a broom, with just a snowblower, that's a lot of salt that we can save that we're not necessarily needing to use on the back end to provide those safe surfaces. If we can get that cleared with the shovel, that's great, and people can stop there. That's always something I like to highlight, that if you're comfortable with that surface with just a shovel, that's great. Stop. I'm not asking you to use salt. I'm asking you to provide safe surfaces. And when you're thinking about how much salt you're needing, it's thinking about applying it only if you need it. So if you've stopped with the shovel and you're happy with it, great. Do you need salt? Maybe not. But then it's also thinking about applying it only where you need it and how much you need. So thinking about, like, for example, at my house, during the winter time, we really only go from the house to the garage, the house to the street, but we have a sidewalk that goes along the side of our house. So I'm not going to put salt on that sidewalk. I might put a little bit of salt on our other sidewalks only if we need it, if we have a little bit of ice or we have some really slick areas, which is very rare to happen, that we can't get a good clean scrape with our shovels. But then it's also thinking about, just like Scott said, getting good space between the grains, not putting salt where we don't walk. People don't walk up against buildings. We walk down the center of sidewalks. So it's thinking about being more intentional about where we're putting salt and how we're using salt to the benefit of our safe surfaces. And so one of these things that we've really worked with is that we've had great success reaching our municipal partners, but we just have been struggling with our parking lots and sidewalks. So we put together a program here called Salt Smart Certified. And so it's thinking about who clears the snow at work, who clears the snow at your apartments. So we have outreach materials available through Salt Smart. We're really pushing for the including in RFPs of liquids and anti-icing and reviewing the level of service. Does it truly need to be the same everywhere? So thinking about, if you have an unused section of parking lot, can you close that off? And instead of clearing that area and putting salt out and wasting that salt, instead closing it off for the winter. So one of the things that we did with Salt Smart Certified is we put together a program that we developed with a steering committee of parking lots and sidewalks winter maintenance professionals. So we had both park districts, we had private contractors, we had environmental staff, and we had some municipal staff as well participate to develop a manual and a training program that really highlights and encourages industry accepted best practices. So these are the best practices that both Scott and I have talked about. They're encouraging the use of liquids, especially because that can save you a lot on salt using liquids. But encouraging these proactive best management practices. We were lucky enough that this manual is also translated into Spanish as a really good resource for those that are not English speakers. This is the Salt Smart Certified certification is an Illinois-based certification. Minnesota has one, New Hampshire has one, but we wanted one that was specific to Illinois. And that's what we ended up with Salt Smart Certified, which has been really great. We have a couple contractors that are Salt Smart Certified so far, and we are seeing this show up in RFPs. So that's what we're excited about, that this program is getting out there. We're working on getting our list of our trained individuals from training this last year. We trained over 350 people on Salt Smart practices, just on parking lots and sidewalks in our last training go around in October, between our 2 virtual workshops and our in-person workshop with Scott that we did in McHenry County. So we're excited that we are going to be getting this list up there. We have our list of certified organizations up there right now on our website. And we've really been focusing on private contractors and people that maintain parking lots and sidewalks. This program really, we took kind of the feedback from our steering committee to develop this program. We really listened to the steering committee, and they really wanted a program that was very targeted to the decision makers as those that are going to be really making those decisions on what practices are going to be included in your plan for the winter, but what practices your organization is going to be using. So that was a big push by our steering committee to do, and we're working on developing more trainings as we go to help supplement some of that as well. But from the perspective of why should our contractors be Salt Smart certified? We've talked with our contractors, and this kind of a certification really assures clients and facility users that they are knowledgeable on the best management practices to provide those safe surfaces and reduce damage to their properties. So it's thinking about the damage to the concrete, to the infrastructure, to the landscaping, that these practices are going to protect their property. And that's one of these benefits of being Salt Smart certified and using Salt Smart certified contractors. From a contractor perspective, adopting the best management practices does save them money. It wastes less materials. We definitely have contractors that are very much in the game to make money. And so for them, it's very important that they're being very careful with their material use, and using these best practices really helps support that. It's an advertising piece for them as well. We are listing them on our website as Salt Smart certified, and we are giving them access to some specific resources that we're working on developing for our Salt Smart certified organizations to help them implement these best practices through both training, but also marketing handouts that they can use with clients, and educational handouts and specific resources to them that will help support them through being Salt Smart certified. So one of the other programs that we are developing that we're launching this year is Winter Chloride Watchers. So we are partnering with Illinois River Watch, which is from the National Great Rivers Research and Education Center down in the St. Louis area on the Illinois side. But we're partnering with Illinois River Watch to offer Winter Chloride Watchers here in Northeast Illinois. We are hosting trainings this fall. We have one remaining training left in December. So if you are interested, I would love to see you at that virtual training to come learn more about Winter Chloride Watchers and what you can do to kind of help measure the chloride in our local waterways. It's December 6th. It's at 7 o'clock, and registration is available on our website, theconservationfoundation.org/WCW. But we are recruiting and training volunteers in Northeast Illinois. So volunteers are attending a training class, they're completing their site registration forms, and they are agreeing to monitor their local waterway a minimum of once per month from November to May. So what we're asking them to do is we really want to see those impacts through the spring. So we're looking to see not just that we see it go up, great, but also to see what happens kind of in that springtime as we watch that chloride come back down. How quickly does it come back down? And so our volunteers are then collecting and submitting their chloride results. So this is kind of a short summary map of the sites so far that have kind of been picked, those kind of regional locations. This was an original program out of the St. Louis area from the Illinois River Watch folks, there's a lot of data down there, but we're working on building that data set up here. I'm excited to see with this data set that it is going to be more of a for general knowledge information because it is a citizen science program. But I'm really excited to kind of see some of those overarching trends across our area. The test kits are being provided to volunteers at no cost. We were lucky enough to get funding to help cover this, which I'm really excited about. The volunteers get a series of test strips that they need to complete their minimum once a month samples. And they get a results card, they get a sample vial, they get a little sticky of Post-it notes to help report their results. And it's fairly straightforward of putting the test strip, collect a sample, put that test strip in, and let it do its thing for about 5 minutes. And then you are able to read the results and get a conversion from Quantab units to chloride. So these results are being reported through water rangers, and we're asking volunteers also to take pictures of their creeks to help encourage people to put eyes on their waterways and be cognizant of like what's happening with their waterways, to just kind of keep watching it over time. Some examples of what some of these test strips look like in the field, and kind of how those little chloride marks those look on the test strip. And then, like I said, those results are being reported in Winter Chloride Watchers. It's a fairly straightforward website that we're using. It's called Water Rangers. It's a Canadian website, so sometimes you might get your location put in Canada. We've seen that a couple times, but we're hoping to get everybody kind of situated and tech worked out to get them closer to home. But it is a fairly straightforward site to use with reporting your data. And this is kind of more zoomed in area of our Northeast Illinois of how many sites are being covered and how many samples we're getting so far. So I'm excited that we're doing this. We've had over about 100 volunteers trained so far this winter season on our end. And I know not everyone's able to participate, but we're at least training them, getting that word out about chloride. So if you do want to participate, again, it's the Conservation Foundation /WCW. I would love to see many of you there and participating. So feel free to share that information out with your networks as well to help get that word out about training. Another thing that we do through the Salt Smart Collaborative is share outreach materials. All of our outreach resources are available on our website, saltsmart.org, and they are under the Outreach Resources tab. We have graphics and videos targeting key messaging, things like reminding people where they should salt, but also having PSAs and just some general good information. We have some videos from our local communities that they've made, just that good reminder of what tips you can do to help the plow drivers, make the plow drivers' job a little bit easier. So there's a lot of great resources from an outreach perspective that please share. I would love to see some of our messaging get further out there. So you are welcome to share any of our resources, any of our outreach resources that we have. We have a variety of social media posts that you're welcome to use. These are all sorts of targeting our key messages that we're out there about losing the crunch, love the lines, reminding folks about anti-icing, what its role is. There's a variety of resources out there that we'd love to keep getting out further. So please feel free to share these resources. We also have blog posts that you are welcome to use in your website, in your newsletters. We love to share this one, especially when we have folks from HOAs, because these are great blog posts that they can put in for their newsletters to their HOA about all these best management practices and what people can do at home. So there's a lot of great resources out there. We have a ton of different posters, just reminding folks of before you grab the salt, to turn to those physical tools, turn to your shovel, turn to your broom, turn to your ice scraper before reaching for the salt, as well as some education posters about losing the crunch, loving the lines. This is a great one to put up if you've got a park district facility or another facility you're maintaining, of just reminding people of why they're seeing the lines on the road versus the crunch. We have a lot of handouts that we give to residents and to our communities that are much more targeted to the general public. We have a great Salt Smart handout about our entire program. We have some bookmarks that have a good reminder of what those steps need to be to remind people to shovel first before reaching for the salt. We also have salt cups that have the instructions on the back. So that 10-ounce salt cup right there, that'll cover at least 10 sidewalk squares. Like the big big sidewalk squares, or even about a 500 square foot section of driveway, which is about a standard 2-car driveway. So to really put that in perspective for our residents and our general public to really think about how much salt they actually need, compared with how much salt they might actually be using. We also have a Salt Smart and You exhibit. There are 2 sets of this exhibit. One was funded through Scott Sensible Salting Group, as well as through our watershed work groups is funding the other set. But we have these 2 sets going out to a variety of communities this year to help educate on salt between our local communities, using them in their municipal buildings, their rec centers, their libraries. So I'm excited that this is getting out. And I want to throw out for the opportunity for any questions about our Salt Smart program. I've included Jennifer's contact information in here as both of us kind of co-coordinate this.